Research also shows that we do have the means to permanently and substantially increase, the quality of the experience of our life. The problem is we're looking at the wrong things to make us happy. We're so entranced with the external elements, and we think that's where the threats to my happiness will come from. That's where my happiness will come from if I reach these carrots and so forth. And so this is mostly delusional, but armed with, this science of what makes us happy, we can actually achieve a deep kind of happiness that is not at the whims of, what happens in our environment. And
messy and masterful. In this podcast, we speak about the success of people who have achieved, built, or done something amazing, special, remarkable, noteworthy, and/or fabulous. Think of presidents, doctors, chefs, architects, filmmakers, writers, philosophers, CEOs, journalists, and the list goes on and on of people who've had a genuine impact on this world. But rather than underlining their career victories, we speak about the challenges they needed to overcome to actually get there. In each episode, we discuss 3 of such challenges, obstacles, difficulties, and/or hurdles with our guest, putting the messy of their lives next to the masterful. A very warm welcome to you. My name is Aldo, and I'm so happy you could make it. So sit back, relax, and download the podcast here. Welcome, dear listener. So happy you are here. So happy you are ready for another episode of Messy and Masterful. This one is a special one because it is an interview with a recurring guest. This is the 3rd time we're having him on our podcast program. And if you might recall that just before Christmas, we had Dr. Michael Vlerick on, the philosopher who speaks about happiness. And when we spoke to him back in December, he just had a book out, or his book was about to be published. And the book is all about why we human beings are not happier. And I think that's a very interesting notion. So there's something in us, says Dr. Michael Vlerick, that keeps us from being genuinely, profoundly happy. And I thought that was such an interesting angle, such an interesting notion, that we decided to do several interviews on this topic. And here's the first one in this specific series. It's about our genetics and how we are genetically programmed to be more unhappy than we need to be. And I think it's a fascinating notion. Now, this is the first one, as I said. We're going to look at happiness from loads of other angles together with Michael. And I hope you enjoy it. I can listen to Michael for hours. He's just such a kind of very well-informed academic and also a great speaker around this topic. So the more the merrier. So with that, I hope you enjoy episode 79, Dr. Michael Vlerick, Happiness versus Our Genes. Michael, thank you so much for having me over here.
Thank you, Aldo, for coming all this way to beautiful Ghent. So happy to have you here.
Yeah, thank you. It's really amazing. I feel so lucky that we found each other in a way, talking about everything and anything, so to say. Mm-hmm. And we spoke for the first time in interview format in 2021. And you spoke about your first book. And now it's such a joy and such a privilege to be talking about your second book, Why We Are Not Happier. And the first interview we did just in December was all pre-launch. And now the book has launched on a Blue Monday of all days, which I thought was very original. Tell me a little bit more about how it all went. How was it received and where are we today with the book?
Yeah, so indeed it was launched on January 15th, which is supposed to be the Blue Monday, the bluest day, the most depressed day of the year. The holidays are gone, the parties are gone. It's just a cold, dark winter here in Northern Europe. Just as a side note, I mean, they have actually done research on the blueness of that Monday, and it seems to be more of a marketing hype than anything actual. But we all know that feeling, and it's definitely a time where it's good to reflect on things. And so the publisher thought it would be a nice way to introduce and launch the book at that moment. And so
I thought it was very clever.
Yeah,
it was very nice moment. Yeah.
And so it was well received, I can say. I'm happy to say that there was quite a few, and there was some interest from the press, and there were 2 nice articles already published in Belgian newspapers about the books, and a few other interviews and a podcast appearance, and some more lined up. So yes, I'm very happy.
Nice. Any reactions that you did not expect? Any feedback from readers or potential readers that you thought, oh, I didn't see that one coming?
Yeah, maybe. I had a very interesting interaction with a reader, not of the book, but of an article written about the book and an interview in which, and we may be talking about it in this episode, but in which I talk about a study in which they compared lottery winners with people who became paraplegic for life. And this is already a big scoop. Yeah. Well, interestingly enough, after 6 months after these happenings, well, we see that the happiness levels of both groups kind of revert back to the happiness level they had before the accident or winning the lottery, which shows that it has much less impact on long-term happiness than you would think. And these are obviously pretty extreme scenarios. But then there was this person contacting me, and I think she was suffering from a certain chronic disease, and her mom had won the lottery, and she said, well, I don't completely agree with that point, and I can see from her point of view and from an individual point of view that, I mean, this might not always be the case, and I fully understood her points. But again, these are studies over larger groups of people, and so there's interesting lessons to be learned there.
Yeah, very interesting. And yeah, as you say, you take, this is a scenario with such 2 opposites, right? And
exactly.
It's still same levels of happiness in the long term, which is very interesting.
Yeah, well, indeed, if there's one thing coming out of the research on happiness is that external circumstances matter way less than we tend to think on our long-term happiness. And in fact, what happens is that we kind of float around this kind of pretty stable happiness set point, as they call it. When things go well, we float above it, and then when things go badly, we take a little dip. But and this is the good side of this fact. I mean, we kind of have a psychological immune system, and we get on top of things most often.
Yeah. Fascinating. Well, I already announced it that we're going to do more interviews around why we're not happier, because I think, as I said before, it's a very intriguing topic. And we decided to do not 1, but a total of 7 interviews, all around specific areas in your beautiful book that we have in front of us here. So we're going to talk about a concrete game plan, actually, on how to get happier, which is going to be an interview further down in the future. 10 concrete steps towards a happier life. How we can train our brain for happiness. That's something we're going to talk about. The simple recipe for happiness is another topic. Happiness versus our modern environment, how we can genetically engineer our happiness, and then the topic of today, happiness versus our genes. So our genetics against happiness, which is actually also the plea in your book, like, something in us doesn't want us to be happy, and get to the core of that. I think in our first interview, we kind of skimmed across all of these topics, and these interviews are actually meant to take a further deep dive in each of these topics. Happiness versus our genes, that's very intriguing in and of itself. Why, first of all, versus? Tell me why versus, why not happiness and our genes? Doesn't sound very collaborative.
Yeah. So it's not all bad. There's definitely also happiness thanks to our genes. I mean, all of the joyful and wonderful emotions and experiences in life, well, they're also made possible by our genetic makeup. Everything in our physical and our mental makeup, well, is genetically determined to a certain extent, right? But there are aspects of our psychology, and so, which again are determined by our genetics, that stand in the way of happiness. And that doesn't mean, and this is the very hopeful message I want to get across right from the start, right? That doesn't mean that, happiness will forever elude us, there are actually insights and practices that can really help us along there and make a deep kind of happiness possible, you could say, despite certain aspects of our genetic programming. There are definitely elements in our genes, and there are good evolutionary reasons for that, form obstacles to a happy life.
Yeah, and so let's break it down.
Yeah.
So we opened with a Blue Monday. So are there people that are just more genetically susceptible to the idea of Blue Monday than others? Is that just is that like a base pair in our genes? So is that a mutation that can be found in our genome, or is that being too basic with this information?
Yes, that's definitely the case. Research shows that certain people have more of a genetic disposition, hereditary disposition towards depression, for instance, and certain psychological vulnerabilities. And I talked about this happiness set point. Well, to a certain extent, where that set point is at is genetically determined. So that will vary from individual to individual. The research is pretty clear on that. But again, we can all do something about it. And more importantly, when I'm talking about happiness versus our genes, I'm not so much talking about how certain people are predisposed towards less or more happiness than other people. It's rather about these aspects in the human genome that we all possess that can stand in the way to happiness, and that we all possess to a certain extent. And I think when we'll get into them, that will ring a bell with most listeners.
Yeah. Okay, so let's start with what we all possess. So,
yeah.
And then from a genetic perspective, you have the lead here, Michael.
Okay, definitely. Definitely. So there are two aspects that kind of stand in the way of our happiness. And the first one is that we are really focused on the negative aspects of our lives. You know, we dwell a lot on what went wrong in the past, what goes wrong in the present, and what could go wrong in the future. Right? We also have a hyperactive, threat detection mechanism, like constantly on the lookout for things that might turn sour and so forth. So we're really attuned to that, and that weighs on our enjoyment of life, on happiness in general. That is one. The other one is that we have a tendency to get used to improved conditions really quickly. Remember our lottery winners, after 6 months, we're back to baseline. Yeah. And from there, keep craving for more, keep craving for new things, and always think that our happiness lies in our future. Yeah. We have this kind of, I will be happy when this and that or that materializes. And every time we catch it, we get used to it, and we're longing for the next thing to come around. Now, all of this makes perfect sense when you think about it from an evolutionary perspective. Now, a good way to understand the theory of evolution is from a genetic perspective. And from that perspective, well, genes, first of all, are replicators. They make copies of themselves. If the organism reproduces itself, well, copies of those genes are implanted into the offspring, right? So then they successfully copy themselves. Not all genes will be able to copy themselves with the same success. Certain genes will disappear in the genes pool of a certain species. Yeah. Other genes will be very successful and will take over the gene pool, right? So we have to ask ourselves now, what factors or what elements make a gene successful in replicating itself? And there's two important elements. The first one is well known, I think. Well, first of all, providing the organism with characteristics, physical traits that help that organism survive and reproduce. Think about camouflage and, the sharp teeth of the predator, the long neck of the giraffe to browse these high trees and so forth. We all know all these beautiful adaptations. Well, obviously, that's a very good strategy for those genes. The genes coding for these traits will be very successful in copying themselves because they provide the organism with tools to survive and reproduce. Yeah. But when it comes to animal species, and so including humans, of course, well, equally important is how those genes will kind of guide the organism through its environment, an environment which holds a lot of threats and a lot of opportunities, right? So the organism has to be guided through an environment, seize the opportunities, and kind of deal with the threats, fight it, flight, and so forth. Now, the first very important thing to bear in mind is that generally threats will outweigh opportunities. Missing a threat could end the life of the organism and therefore eradicate all replication ambitions of those genes. Not seizing an opportunity is obviously a missed opportunity, but there will be more opportunities in the future. Right? So our genes will do anything to prevent those threats from happening. And so the way they steer us and guide us through that environment and deal with threats and opportunities is with what I call sticks and carrots. Now, sticks are physical pain and painful emotions. And once we've experienced those, we'll do anything not to have to experience that in the future, and we'll deal with the situation in order to avoid these sticks, right? So they steer us away from threats. Carrots are pleasure and, rewarding emotions. And once we experience those, we want as much of those as possible, right? And so whatever caused that in the environment, we'll be chasing that more and more, like good food, reproductive opportunities, and so forth.
Yeah.
Now, since the threats outweigh the opportunities, well, our genes, they wield large sticks and small carrots, right? So we feel that physical and emotional pain happens more frequently for longer durations and more intensely than pleasure and positive emotions. Perhaps in a very simple way, when we look at physical pain and physical sensations of pleasure, like compare, for instance, a painful thing like holding your finger in a flame. Well, with a nice sensation, like now we have a nice glass of water, you're thirsty, you sip. Well, there's a feeling of pleasure because you do something good for your organism, you help it survive, and so forth. But as we can all attest, when you compare these two experiences, well, the painful experience can be way more intense than the pleasureful, right? Yeah. We also know exactly where it hurts, whereas the pleasure feeling is typically more diffused. That is because we have a specialized nervous system, to detect painful stimuli, right? Harmful stimuli for the organism. It's called nociceptors. And they will light up and really, force us to behave in certain ways to avoid that harm from happening, right? So that helps us, keeps us intact, but obviously it comes with a pretty big cost for us as well in terms of experience. Yeah.
What part of your research is based on a philosophical foundation, and which one is kind of based on, the actual research in biosciences or in life sciences more? So I 100% believe you, but I'm just thinking, like, where does philosophy meet life sciences in kind of all the things you just told me?
Yeah, so in my previous books and in this one as well, what I'm doing is applying evolutionary theory to important questions. And in this book, so it would be individual happiness and actually, thinking about the human condition. Yeah. Right. And so what I do is I look at all of the scientific research I can that is relevant to the topic. So in this case, a lot of psychology, but I kind of shed a new light on it by applying this evolutionary theory to what we find there. And so kind of make a coherent story about how we got to be the beings that we are and what we can do about it, because this is a major part of the book.
So when talking species, so the ability to think and the ability to, we know a lot about our own cognitive functions. Have you also looked at other species? It's like, is there one kind of type of animal more depressive than another one? Do we know anything about that, or am I now pushing it?
That's very hard to say, but we can assume a lot, right? When we look at other animals, we see the similarities in their nervous system, in their in the organization of their brain, and so forth. We look at their behavior, and we can see a lot of similarities there with animals that are pretty similar. Yeah. For instance, the chimpanzees and the bonobos, obviously the most similar other species to humans. Yeah. Well, we find a lot of similar psychological traits, like craving status and so forth. Well, we find very similar kind of behavior. But I was talking about these pain sensations. Well, I think it's pretty obvious, both from a common sense perspective when we look at animals and the way they react, and we look at ourselves, that most animals, at least, we're not talking about insects. I mean, there's a lot of debate on this. But especially if you look at mammals, but also reptiles and so forth, fish, well, that they have this capacity for pain, and that probably that this is a pretty similar kind of experience for them. Physical pain, that is, right? And I'm not talking about any kind of mental fallout from that and so forth. The kind of emotional pain that might follow it.
Yeah.
That might be pretty different, but the physical sensations of pain, the nociceptors and so forth, we find these in other species as well, definitely.
You said something earlier about status and kind of, the human sense of achievement. And I think we've both been through it. And I think many people in our environment, like being angry young women or angry young men, trying to achieve certain ambition. I'm trying to figure out which of that is kind of a good incentive. When you say stick or carrot, which of that is actually a good one because it brings you something. And which one is actually completely, we could have well done without. Because often when I look back at myself, now being 44, I look back at certain things like, why was I so pushy on this topic, which eventually didn't bring me a lot. And, if I would have maybe took it slower on that level, I would have, other things that I've been, I wasn't so keen on doing, but I've been consistent and actually brought me more. I don't know. I don't know. I'm trying to say like retrospectively, always when you look back, it's like, what, why were you so pressured? Why were you so angry, basically, to achieve something? And was it really needed? Do you have an idea around,
Yeah, definitely. And I write about status in the book as well, and this intense craving for status. And this is very much what I would call a false carrot, right? It looks very alluring. Yeah. If I gain this status and this and more respect and so forth. So it's a big driver, a motivator. And again, there's very good evolutionary reasons for that, because ancestors who would have achieved the high status, got more chance to survive in the group, more means, more resources, but definitely also more reproductive opportunities. And that's the name of the game in evolution, right? So we inherited exactly. And we inherited the genes of these status seekers. And so it's very much part of human psychology. And as I said, also other species, social species really show this. And no,
but what I'm also trying to say is that status in and of itself is very hollow. It's very shallow. It's like, this is what I mean with the angry young man element. It's like day one, you come into a company with no experience, and then you're young and ambitious, and you say, well, I need to be like director or CEO or whatever tomorrow, whereas you do not have the experience. You do not have the life wisdom. You do not have, you didn't put in the hours to achieve certain things, right? So it's almost a kind of an, surreal craving of, young and ambitious people who just graduated, for instance, that say, well, I want to be here. I want to be the président directeur général here tomorrow. Whereas you're like, well, hold on. So I'm trying to say, how do you say that? You want to sprint before you can walk? I hope
definitely. Yeah.
But it's very intense. I recall from myself, it's a very intense feeling. Like if I don't manifest myself in this way, I might miss the boat, right? I think that's the biggest fear. Whereas at the end of the day, you're like, well, it's completely hollow. There's nothing there.
Yes, and underlying that feeling is the unchecked assumption that if you get there, if you reach this point, you will be incredibly happy. You will be floating around in pure bliss. And this is often what we think. Now, research clearly shows that extremely successful people, from Olympic gold medal winners to, the most famous singers, actors, but also scientists and CEOs and what have you not, they are not more happy than average and even more vulnerable to depression and addiction, right? So it clearly shows that, most of these people reaching these unlikely dreams and so really making it to the absolute top of their game, they're not rewarded for it. That doesn't mean we shouldn't have any ambition, but if the ambition is solely, I want to be on top and this is going to make me very happy, this is probably going to be a very disappointing road, even if you, beat all of the odds and actually make it to the absolute top.
Yeah. There is no point in denying it. I am in love. And you might have already known it. that I was in love with podcasting and interviewing people all over the world, well, I'm also in love now with a recording tool for our podcast episodes, which is called Riverside.fm. I've kissed many frogs when it came to recording episodes, but this one is really the one with the most amazing studio features. Riverside really offers you everything you need in creating the perfect episode, whether these are short or long, whether these are multiple people you're talking to or just you, or whether this is about your show notes or the video recording or even creating easy snippets that you can use on social media. Riverside truly has it all. If you go to our show notes, you will find a link to Riverside. And if you use that link, you'll even get a 20% discount. Yes, you heard that correctly. A 20% discount in getting started with this incredible podcast recording tool. Look no more. Riverside.fm is here. Sorry, I think we've drifted away from...
A little bit, and we might come back to that because... Exactly. We skipped straight to the carrots and we were just getting started on the sticks, right? So maybe to just back up a little bit. And so, okay, are genes wielding these large sticks and these small carrots because those threats outweigh the opportunities? And so I said, well, physical pain compared to physical forms of pleasure, you could say, well, pain is more intense and will elicit, extreme behavior to avoid that threat and so forth. But I think more relevantly for, happiness and the human condition in general are a number of psychological traits that follow from that asymmetric relationship between threats and opportunities. And the first is, and I briefly mentioned this, is our hyperactive threat detection, right? So imagine you're camping in the woods, you're by yourself, and there's no predators in those woods, and most likely as well no, murderous psychopaths roaming around. But that's your rational brain. Your more emotional brain hears certain noises there in the distance and are these steps? And you start to wonder, you get the stress reaction and so forth. That is your hyperactive, threat detector. It's constantly on. And even though rationally it is fine, you will still obviously be in the grips of emotions like fear. But perhaps more an everyday occurrence. You're calling a friend, the friend doesn't pick up, you call again, the friend doesn't pick up. And again, your rational brain tells you, well, he's probably busy and maybe he forgot his phone, must be something like that. But quite soon, the doubt starts creeping in and then the fear starts, or at least, the stress. What did I say? Is he mad at me? Is it something I said? And then you start to rack your brain and you come up with all kinds of fantastical scenarios in which your friend might, be displeased with you for some reason. Or imagine, you're driving on the road and there's somebody cutting you off. And before you know it, there's this angry outburst. We all, I think, know what I'm talking about here. Again, we've got this hyperactive threat detection. And when there's the slightest possibility of threat, well, what happens is the rational part of our brain is shut off and we get a massive stress reaction and we react with our fight or flight response, right? With fear or anger. Yeah. Or those little siblings, stress and frustration. Yeah. And so we constantly, experience these kind of things throughout our lives, even though most typically, and especially in our modern environment, these threats are not actually serious threats. Yeah. And we suffer the consequences, but also the people around us suffer the consequences because they have to deal with our emotional outbursts.
Yeah. Is that also genetic? The number of times you basically jump into that fight or flight response, that some people do it quicker than others, right? Some people are, less aggressive in traffic than others.
Definitely.
Or just more calm, have more calm.
Definitely. Yeah. There's some kind of genetic base for that, but we all have that basic system, right? And in the brain, it's the so-called amygdala. They code for that fight or flight response. It is the center of the emotional part of our brain, and this kind of these kind of stress reactions and these responses with fear and anger. They're universally human. Some people will be more prone to reacting with fear. Others will be more prone to react with anger, and there's probably genetic basis for that. But more importantly, and now I'm really fast forwarding to something we'll discuss down the line, is that these definitely do not only depend on genetic predisposition, but a lot on how you train or not train yourself. And the more you engage in certain kind of reactions, the more you respond to certain triggers with, for instance, anger. I mean, the shorter your fuse is going to get because your brain is trained in responding in a certain way to a certain trigger. And the more that response goes, the more automatic that specific response will become in the future. Right. And so that's also where the freedom lies, right? We can kind of rewire our brain with specific, practices.
Yeah. It reminds me a little bit of a toddler who throws a tantrum.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So a toddler who throws a tantrum in its initial response, it's a very genuine reaction, right?
Yep.
They get upset because they don't get the toy or they don't get, the food or whatever they're looking for. But you need to understand the emotion and also make the toddler understand that the emotion they're going through is valid, but nevertheless, you cannot kind of give in to whatever the toddler wants, because otherwise you would be rewarding the behavior.
Exactly.
I think if we are rewarded with being aggressive, if I see that my aggression has its effects, I'm likely to use it again. Whereas if I don't, then I might say, well, maybe try something else.
Yeah. And while it also might seem that, having this emotional outburst is kind of beneficial, because we always think the alternative is, pent up anger or fear and not expressing itself and therefore suffering longer. Well, it's maybe better in a certain way than, just having it all stay inside and suffering those consequences. But there are definitely ways to kind of deal with these emotions in a way that will not only benefit the others around you because you will not have these emotional outbursts, but also yourself, because you can train your brain not to experience the intensity of these negative emotions. And so that can really make a big difference to your emotional life. And the more you let go of these, natural outbursts, again, the more you train your brain to react in these ways.
Sorry, again, I'm off the genetics. I'm already into the training training plan. But it's just fascinating. We could talk for hours here.
Yeah, and then so let me cover that other incredibly even more profound aspect of our psychology that follows from these large sticks and these small carrots. And that is what is called the negativity bias. Now, imagine you're giving a presentation at work. It goes well, people applaud you afterwards, and there's lots of colleagues who come afterwards and tell you how good job you've done, and you said interesting things and so forth. So all is well. But there's this one colleague who didn't like it, and who tells you in a pretty, unrespectful way what he thought about the presentation. Now, 2 months later, let's say, you think back about that presentation and about the comments you got about your presentation. What is the one comment that you will be able probably to recall word by word? It's not going to be the positive ones. They will slide off your brain. It will definitely be, that negative comment, right? So negative elements in our environment, well, they tend to make a much bigger impression on us than positive elements in our environment. We tend to remember them much better, but also they have more of a psychological impact, right? So the pain we feel from something negative is more intense than the pleasure we feel from something positive. And there's a number of ways in which this negativity bias plays out, right? So, for instance, in relationships, they found that for every negative interaction in a couple, a fight, let's say, you needed 5 positive interactions to offset the negative effect of that. And if you're not striking at least that balance, 5-1, right, you're supposedly in the danger zone. That is, of course, because these negative events have a much more profound impact and negative impact than these positive events do. We also find it in how people perceive the world. Now, we're way too pessimistic about the state of the world. And there was this interesting book written about that by Hans Rosling. It's called Factfulness. And he starts the book with giving you a certain quiz, like, for instance, compared to 20 years ago, do we have the same percentage of people living in poverty or more or less and so forth? Well, he finds that people are, systematically biased towards having a more negative view of the state of the world than is actually the case. Yeah. And he says we perform worse than chimps, because we only have, I think, on average, people score only have like 30 or 35% right, not even. And so chimps who would just, select by random would do better. That's his whole point. Now, that has to do with a number of elements, but the most important element is that we're just so much more on the lookout for negative things. Yeah. And obviously, the newspapers and the media kind of serve us and on our whims and kind of serve us all these negative elements because they know that's what we want to click on and that's what we're looking out for. So again, looking out for these threats, looking out for these negative elements, and therefore suffering the emotional consequences. But you also, for instance, find it in economics. There's this well-known loss aspect of loss aversion. The fact that, for instance, investors tend to take much more risk not to incur loss, then they are willing to take risk to increase a certain gain of an investment and so forth. Because again, a loss of the same size hurts more than a gain of that size benefits you.
What I find interesting about this is that even though I very much appreciate the way you explain it, but it's not new to us, right? We know this, yet still we're not able to outsmart ourselves on this level, right? It could be like almost dietary restriction. Like that eating loads of French fries is not good for your health. Therefore, we do not eat French fries every day. At least I don't, right? As tempting as it might be, it's just not good for our health, right?
Yeah.
It has all the triggers of addiction and, tasty, salty, kind of everything. Yet we know that we should not. For some reason, we don't get that with what you just said. For some reason, we still think that this negativity bias is like an honest warning signal, even though it's clickbait fast food in the purest sense of the word, wherever we see it.
Yes, I understand, and especially when it comes to the news, right? And there's more and more psychologists who start to warn for this and to say, you need a more balanced view. And that doesn't mean you cannot inform yourselves about the state of the world. And I do think it's important that the problems that are there in the world, that they are brought to attention, because that's a way, we can do something about it. So it's definitely not a plea for only giving a good news show and not saying anything of what goes wrong in the world. Definitely not. But we should strive to have a more balanced view of the world. And I said there's a number of reasons for this bias, for the fact that, we have such a negative view of the state of the world, and the media kind of serving us, bad news much more than good news. It is, for a large part, as I said, because we're on the lookout for bad news, and these are for-profit companies, and then the articles that sell are the ones that warn us for bad things. Yeah. Now, that's definitely one. That's also an important factor. Bad news is often sudden news, right? There's an earthquake here. The war broke out, that kind of stuff, that happens in a day. Yeah. Good news and good trends are typically very gradual, like people being lifted out of poverty, conflict in general being on the downslope and so forth. Right. And so there's never a day that a journalist wakes up and wow, now is the day to write something about the fact that we've lifted so many people out of poverty. Right. So we typically don't get that news. And that is also due to the nature of these events. Positive events are kind of gradual trends more, and negative events are very sudden quite often.
Yeah, no, I get that part. But you see it also in other things. Like, we think it's very tasty if someone in Hollywood is getting his 7th divorce, right? Or all the gossip, right? I kind of look at it like, that's what the gossip media lives from, about people's wrecked relationships. Or there is an element of, as you say, that maybe that's also negativity bias. Like, oh, look, that person has a turbulent life as well, or kind of, it's kind of an outlet for us. Right? And you're right. It's kind of, once it gets negative, it triggers our curiosity. Right? Equally so, of course, we would also be happy if this person has a glamorous wedding or something, but there's still it is more malicious than you think it is. I mean, I get the sudden part, right?
Definitely. And when it comes to gossiping, there's also other elements in play, right? We're social creatures. We're constantly comparing ourselves with others and so forth. So we're incredibly interested in the lives of others. Again, this is seen in other social intelligence species as well. Yeah. Constantly on the lookout, who ranks where, who does what is the status of this person. And obviously we're not consciously aware of this, but we're constantly making these kind of computations. And that is also underlies, the immense success of social media, for instance, which, provides us all of this information, right? Although pretty biased, that is for sure. But so that's definitely, and there we get back into the territory of, status and so forth, because in that whole social world, I mean, we want to track, the status of others and improve our status in all kinds of ways. And then gossip is definitely one of the chosen strategies to do those things.
I made a big mistake. I said French fries, and I'm here in the heart of Belgium. And you do not see this, dear listener, but Michael looked at me in shock. It's, of course, Belgian fries, not French fries.
Yeah, we all know that.
We all know this. It's Belgian fries. Do not go into this negativity bias rabbit hole of French fries or Belgian fries. They are Belgian. That's no, all jokes aside, I think this is tremendously interesting. I'm already, again, looking for tools on how to help ourselves, but that's not what this session is about. What more should we know about ourselves genetically if we really deeply want to understand our happiness? Is there anything still on the table that we haven't discussed yet, Mark?
Yeah, so we've looked at the sticks, right? And so that's why the sticks are more prevalent, are more enduring, are more intense often than the carrots. Yeah. But the problem is, not only with the sticks, actually with many of the carrots as well. And we've briefly talked about it when we went off topic at the beginning, right? Many of the carrots that we're chasing are false. We think we'll be happy when we have these carrots. I mean, when we finally get there, and we generally feel that will be the case. But then when that happens, in, a few weeks, a few months, the longest, we get used to it and we're back to square one. We're back to baseline happiness and we're craving for the new carrot. And this kind of pattern never stops, right? It's kind of hedonic adaptation. We always think, I will be very happy when I get this promotion, or when I get this new job, or this new car, or this new house, or when I have a partner, or when I have kids. And so forth. And these things can be very good and so forth, but they will not satisfy you enduringly. You will get used to this. This will become the new normal. And from there, that mental pattern of craving for something else, something better, thinking you will be happy or really happy when, will just continue and continue and continue. Yeah. And this obviously is what stands in the way of contentment and of a happy life.
But we do need them, right? Because otherwise, how do we advance? Like, because a carrot is an ambition in essence, what you're saying. And yes, we maybe attribute a lot more to the ambition than we should, but we do need them to kind of take ourselves to the next level.
Yeah. So I think that's an important point we should get into. What I'm advocating, and we're not even at the solution part or any of the things here, but what I'm advocating is definitely not have no ambition because it will not make you happy in the long term. No, definitely if you feel enthusiastic about something and you want to achieve something, by all means go for it. But stop deluding yourself that you will only be happy if your attempts turn out successful, right? Because this is not the case, and research shows this very clearly. I mean, even if it's the best possible scenario and you will be more successful than you expected, yes, you'll be a bit euphoric for a while, and then you'll, as we said, float about your level of basic level of happiness, but you will get back to that level, and you won't be enduringly or permanently happier because of it.
So, for instance, maybe that, again, Grandpa speaks at 44, but I kind of know that it doesn't, but still I'm aiming for certain things because, right? Is that then the right way of dealing with it? Are you basically, I know you're not advocating for it, but are you basically saying you can have that ambition, just don't put all your eggs in one basket, as they say. Like, that's not the one and only, that's not the only thing. So spread the risk, have multiple. Or are you saying, well, find another baseline and redefine what a carrot should be for you?
Yeah, a number of questions there. Like, first of all, put eggs in different baskets or one basket. This is not about that. I mean, it might be a good idea to put them in different baskets, but again, if you're really passionate about this one project and so forth, and you're intrinsically motivated, and by all means, it will be intrinsically rewarding to do this. And so this would definitely be a road to happiness. Yeah. The thing is, it's about, the expectations and also the fuel of your ambition, I would say. Right. And if the fuel of your ambition is purely, status related, I want to do this because I want this respect, I want this status and so forth. And then if you do some soul searching, you might find this is a big motivator because, again, we inherited the genes of all of these status seekers in the past. Right. So this is deeply human to be motivated by these things. Yeah. Well, the thing is, then you will probably be disappointed down the line, even if your attempts turn out successful. Yeah. That being said, we can be motivated to do all sorts of things for a number of different reasons. You can be genuinely motivated to make the world a better place and to help other people. And this, for instance, research shows that if this would be your motivation, you would be incredibly rewarded. And again, this will come later, but like altruistic behavior in its many facets has been linked by research to incredible levels of well-being. So,
can you explain to me intrinsic? You said intrinsically motivated. What's the difference between intrinsically motivated and just motivated?
That I would say an extrinsic motivation is that you want to pursue something for something else, right? I want to do this to get money. I want to do this to get status and so forth. And so obviously there will always be some sort of extrinsic motivation as well in the job. Well, we all need to get paid. We all need to survive. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if there's no intrinsic motivation at all, which means I want to pursue this because I enjoy this activity, because I really like doing this, because I believe it's meaningful, these would be intrinsic motivations. And I think it's important if we can pursue activities for which we're intrinsically motivated, that can be incredibly rewarding.
We are very happy to be partnering with the Code Zone, which is this amazing platform where people can come together to learn how to code. Creators and future makers, they all come together here, both children as well as adults, to learn how to code and develop things, like for instance their own videos or Minecraft mods. The team at Code Zone believes everyone should be able to learn how to code, young or old, and they've got these amazing subscriptions, very easy and very cheap. You'll learn a lot from them. You could do it live or you could do it in your own time at your own leisure. We highly recommend it. They are tailored to support individual interests and capabilities, and I'm sure that once you get hooked on the Code Zone, you never want anything more. Check it out, thecodezone.co.uk or the URL in our show notes. I don't know about you, but I am someone who really loves a true crime series. I just can't get enough of them. If I watch them on the streaming platforms, I really cannot stop binging on them. It really is a guilty pleasure. So if you're like me, then you are going to love coldcaseinc.com, which is a platform that offers you unsolved cases of fictional murder mysteries that you can solve. It's a great community of detectives that come together, offering you video and audio evidence, and step by step you can play the game of solving this murder mystery by yourself. We've paired up with the team at coldcaseinc.com, and if you use our code, which is the word MESSY in capital letters, MESSY, then you even get a 15% off your first online membership. So do check out coldcaseinc.com and get crime solving today. One of the things around negativity bias is, I think, very important in interhuman relationships, right? So, because you said two things. You said we like gossip because we're continuously comparing ourselves to others. And then there's the negativity bias, whereby if it's bad news, it'll travel better than good news, right?
Yeah.
What I always think is fascinating, and I've read somewhere that it's also kind of almost an invented narrative by certain people who have nationalist ideas, is trying to distinguish ourselves, setting ourselves apart from one person and the other. So it's a search for identity, right? We want to, as you say, we come from our forefathers. We strive to realize certain ambitions. But in that, we also kind of have a tendency to slightly wanting to set ourselves apart from others.
Yeah, as you nicely put it, right? We want to distinguish ourselves, right? In a positive way, right? You can also distinguish yourself in a negative way. That's typically not what we aspire to do. So again, this is very much related in the fact that we're deeply social creatures, and the chances of survival and reproduction of our ancestors for the longest time depended on how well we were perceived by others, how we distinguish ourselves from others, and those individuals that came on top of that and were admired by a large part of the groups and so forth, they had better chances of survival and definitely more opportunities for reproduction. So...
Is there anything, I'm looking at politics, right? I'm looking at the negative ads in politics, specifically in the United States. I've never seen, in the UK it's also very polarized, but in the US people go all out. They spend millions and millions trying to make the other candidate look very bad, right? And it's completely socially accepted thing that if we were to run against each other, then I would say Michael Vlerick is evil or something, right? Whereas we say, well, that's one bridge too far or something. So what I'm trying to get to is at a certain point, it hits a level with us genetically almost, I don't know, that we think that's normal, that it becomes kind of like an accepted thing in realizing certain things, in kind of realizing certain objectives. Might not be genetically. I just wonder, where does it become a normal thing? Because if you were to look at it objectively, you say, this is crazy. Why would you be so malicious? Why would you be so mean about another human being? But then there's something in us that at some point accepts it as normal discourse. And I'm wondering what triggers us there to say, okay, this is the new normal for me.
Yeah, I think we can be habituated to many things, culturally, and then we've also, and then to what you call evil or at least immoral situations.
Yeah.
Right. I think there's interesting psychological research as well into, for instance, Nazi Germany, and then people kind of knowing what went on and so forth, but not really stepping up. And then these are normal people, and this could have been you and me, and so forth. So we can gradually, get used to immoral practices. But that being said, the election, that is obviously also a consequence of, the competitive nature of these elections and these debates and so forth. They kind of will produce those kind of arguments. And given our psychology and negativity bias, and then these politicians and all of the people in their teams and so forth know this very well, that when you shed a negative light on the competitor, that it does actually harm a lot. The support they are getting, that is actually probably more efficient as a means than, put yourselves in a good light, which obviously they try to do both. But
I think once I accept the narrative that you are to blame for my unhappiness, then I think it'll allow me to accept certain things about you, whether they're true or not, right?
Yeah, and I think it's important to change that narrative, and we'll get to there. We are responsible for our own happiness, and then we're the only ones who can actually do something about it. If you're looking at other people to give you happiness, well, you will fail in the long run. But also, there's no reason to think other people might take that away for you. And of course, I'm not talking about extreme situations in which people are locked up and so forth in unjust causes.
No, I think, I'm again going on a journey, which I always do in conversation with you, Michael. But I think what I find fascinating is that I don't want to do the work, as you say, that I'm responsible for my own happiness. It's far easier to say you are responsible for my unhappiness. And I can spend loads of time telling you what you did wrong, whereas it doesn't change anything, right? I do not achieve the happiness that I want to achieve, but it's a far easier exercise. But I'm a prisoner of this reasoning because it won't bring me in the end what I want to bring. Because even if you were to succumb to my argumentation, I won't be a winner anyways, because I won't be happier. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's not only easier, it's so incredibly tempting, and it comes naturally. I mean, naturally, spontaneously, we always think that what makes us happy and unhappy is our environment. Yeah. And that's kind of the way we're wired to behave and to interact with the world. But research shows this very clearly, and this has actually been known for a long time in wisdom, so-called wisdom traditions, from Buddhism in the East to Stoicism in the West, right? That these external events have surprising little impact on our long-term happiness. And in order to be happier in the future, and I think if there's one message I can convey to the listeners at this point is, in order to be happier in the future, well, you must change the way you look at the world, and you must work on certain practices. And this is exactly what we'll be talking about in some of the coming episodes, right? Yeah. If there's one conclusion from the research of happiness, and it might be a bit disconcerting, that is that if you do nothing and you just let life run its course as you do now, well, that you cannot expect to be much happier in the future than you are in the present. Yeah. Except, of course, if you're suffering from a temporary depression and so forth, like, let's take that out of consideration. But if not, well, then this is kind of as good as it gets. And research shows this very clearly. But, and this is a very important point I definitely want to stress, what research also shows is that we do have the means to permanently and substantially increase, the quality of the experience of our life. And so we can really do something about it. Yeah. The problem is we're looking at the wrong things to make us happy. We're so entranced with the external elements, and we think that's where the threats to my happiness will come from. That's where my happiness will come from if I reach these carrots and so forth. And so this is mostly delusional. And but armed with this science of what makes us happy, we can actually achieve a deep kind of happiness that doesn't just fluctuate with things going our way and things not really going our way. Yeah. That is not at the whims of what happens in our environment. And this is, I think, the most important message I can convey.
And I underline this message, and this is also why we're doing these interviews. We are on a mission, Michael. That's a very, very important mission, because I fully agree with you that we need to first see the pattern, right? We first need to realize, listen, I think everyone is trying to work on his or her happiness, but some people are looking in the wrong direction. I might be looking in the wrong direction, right? It's not criticism. It's because I'm overwhelmed with so many media or so much information, so many other people with their quest for happiness. There's loads of clutter, there's loads of noise. Yeah. So it's difficult to kind of see what can make you intrinsically motivated and intrinsically happy versus what is short term and what's a false carrot or a false stick, so to
definitely
say, and what is not going to help us.
Yeah, I would even say more. We all look in the wrong direction unless we learn about these things. We're primed to look in the wrong direction. We're primed to think that this next carrot will make us enduringly happy. Yeah. Now, otherwise, the whole ruse of our genes, if you can call it so, to have us chase these carrots, to have us chase more status and so forth, well, it wouldn't work. If we would know, well, down the line, that's not going to make me enduringly happy, we wouldn't be, guided by our genetic programming as it has been selected to guide us. Yeah. Right? So we will be looking in the wrong direction. And for the longest time, I looked in the wrong direction. Right? So it's so interesting and to come across that research, but also these, analyses that have been around again for a long time and in different kind of cultural contexts that really probed into the human mind and found that, well, what we think makes us happy actually does not, and even often stands in the way of our happiness, and that true happiness is to be found somewhere else. Yeah. And I think this is so important to convey that message to as large a group as possible, right? To make as many people as possible happy. And maybe if I can add one important thing there as well, and that's also one of the reasons I wrote the book, That is that some of these elements that stand in the way of our happiness, like this negativity bias and this hedonic adaptation, that we all possess those, right? So many people I found have the feeling of kind of being even more disappointed because they know that objectively everything is going well and they have no reason to complain, but still they find themselves lacking, the happiness they would expect from these external circumstances. Well, know that this is perfectly normal and that is just the way your brain is wired, but know also that you can do something about it.
Yeah. This was a beautiful plea and again, a great kind of, I hope, a chapter and a part of your book. Is there anything before we close off and kind of, let the listener digest all of this information? Is there anything that we still should wrap in this specific section for the reader to know when they read the book?
No, I think we've covered most of the important elements we wanted to cover. Maybe just a look at what is coming, right? So I think in the next episode we'll talk about those elements in our current environment that actually stand in the way of our happiness, and we'll look at why that is the case. And then we'll start looking at what we can do about it. And I really look forward to getting into that.
That's my favorite bit. And I'm continuously tempting Michael to go into that direction. But let's dive into that. Michael, it has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me over here in your beautiful house. I'm looking forward to the next conversation. And if you as a listener have any questions or comments or feedback, then let us know. We appreciate this is not the traditional format of Messy and Masterful, but still very, very important, because Michael and I are on a quest to make more people happier, and we sincerely hope you will join us here as well. Thanks so much, Michael, and on to the next episode.
Thank you so much, Aldo. Looking forward to it.
If you liked this episode, then it would mean the absolute world if you could share it with your friends and or give it a short review on your preferred podcast platform. The more you share your ideas about these interviews, the more people will find out about them. So do let us know what you think. We'd be very, very grateful.
Special thanks to Philip Anderson for our beautiful theme music. This episode was edited by Natalie Piles with production assistance from Genta Metalia.